Whether you've dropped the cash already or you're just considering it, a guided fly fishing trip is a great way to learn new skills and, of course, catch some fish. But guided trips ain't cheap, and there's a certain amount of worry about getting your money's worth. So how do you ensure that you're going to have a great time out with your guide? Well, it all boils down to communication and a little bit of research on your end. If you're looking to shore up your dry fly skills, or you want to learn a new nymphing technique, booking with guides who specialize in that will go a long way towards making your trip a success. This week on Untangled, I'll share 5 simple tips to help you get the most out of your guided fly fishing trip. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant, coming at you from the traffic-ridden, backed-up, bedraggled beehive state of Utah. Back down here yet again. I've been down here a lot lately. I was actually talking to Alex about that the other day. I said, if you guys are going to have me down here to do the show this much, and I'm fine to do that, I just need my accommodations bumped up just a smidge, okay? Rent me a Park City Chateau. At bare minimum, that's what I expect. I'm from Wyoming. I have certain standards of civilization, and my mother-in-law's basement just doesn't have the right je ne sais quoi. So, no, we're down here this week. We're having a good time. We're actually recording 2 podcasts this week. Alex is going to be on the next one, and then we're heading out tomorrow to go film some content that will drop next year for y'all, because for once we are ahead of the game at VFC, and it feels awesome. We're planning stuff out. We've got content already shot. We're editing it. So there's going to be this continuous stream of what we hope is really fun stuff next year. So you're not going to want to miss it. It just feels really nice to have actually planned ahead of time for once, especially for me, because I'm not really like that, and Alex is. So it's been really, really nice to have just a good, consistent plan for what we've got going on. And speaking of planning, that's a great segue actually into the topic for today with guided fly fishing trips. And let's tackle that elephant in the room right out of the get-go. Make sure we're all on the same page here. I know guided trips can be a little spendy, but if you can't afford one right now, that just means that you've got too much unimportant stuff taking up your money. Sell some of your kids' toys if you got to. They don't play with all of them. Okay, I've got a kid now, so I can speak as the authority figure on parenting. Half those toys just sit there. They're decorations. Skip date night if you've got to for a couple of months. I mean, you're already married. What's the point of dating anymore? Come on. There's always a payday loan. You go grab yourself, or tie up some spicy patterns for OnlyFlies. Point is, you got to do what you got to do to get the money to go on one of these trips, okay? No, kidding aside, I know guided trips are spendy. I actually used to run an outfitter, and I guided for a couple of summers before I made the move up to Wyoming full time. And I've had the good fortune of going on a lot of guided trips over the years. So I've been both the guide and the guided. So I think it gives me some different insight into this whole process. And whether you've already got a trip booked or you're thinking about booking one because it's a bucket list item, whatever it is, you're going to want to get your money's worth out of that. And I don't blame you. A full day float on one of my local rivers is going to run you about $700 right now with the tip. And that's not just a chunk of change for most of us that we can just drop and not think about it. Usually is for a lot of people. That's going to be some serious money. You got to budget and you got to plan for. So if you're going to go through all that trouble planning for that, how do you get the most out of it? How do you know that you're spending that money with a good guide and you're going to end the trip feeling satisfied, feeling happy with what happened? Well, part of that is on you managing your own expectations, but there's 5 other really simple tips that'll help you pull that off. And they're a lot easier than skipping date night or that payday loan or selling your kids' toys. Obviously, you don't want to do that stuff. But these tips will really help you pull this off. You'll have to still budget. I can't tell you how to find the money, but once you do, this will help you make the trip that much better. So your first tip, and I want to get this one right out of the way first, do not worry about your skill level. I've seen this from a few beginners, actually, who say, I don't feel like I'm a good enough angler to go on a guided trip. And maybe they'll feel embarrassed if they go on that trip. They don't want the guide to see that their cast is still a work in progress or mending is still something they struggle with. Let me tell you something. As a former guide, we regularly see clients who think that their crap doesn't stink, that they are God's gift to trout streams, and nothing is more embarrassing than being the angler who thinks they're the next Lefty Cray or Lee Wolf, but they can't cast their brand new $1,200 fly rod more than 10 feet. And most of the time, they're completely oblivious to that. And they still think they're doing everything right and perfect. And you try and say, hey, try doing it this way. That'll help it be even better. And they just ignore everything you say. That happens a lot. So that's the embarrassing thing, okay? Short of being that unself-aware, where you aren't going to listen to anybody and you just think you're perfect at it already, which if you're listening to this show, that's not the attitude and the mindset that you've got, because we're here, all of us, myself included, we're here every week to improve and to get better at this stuff. I learned a ton. I think I mentioned this last week's show or maybe the week before. I still learn a ton and remember things as I'm doing show prep every week of things that I need to focus on more, I got to do better at, or even just breaking concepts down simply and trying to teach them helps hone those things for me. So this isn't just education for the listeners, this is education for myself too. And if you're here, you're listening to this show, right? That's the attitude we've got. We all want to learn and improve. So unless you are really that unself-aware, you're going to be just fine. You're not going to be embarrassed. The guide, honestly, a lot of guides are going to be really excited to take someone who's a little bit newer because you'll have fewer bad habits that they have to unteach. You're usually a little bit more teachable when you're brand new to the sport. And I know when I was guiding, my favorite clients to take were the folks who were brand new, who maybe even never picked up a fly rod before, because they were often the most teachable. They would listen to my advice. They would work hard to put it into practice, and then they would often end up catching fish because of that. The best guides are going to be great teachers. That's what separates the great guides from the meh guides. And great teachers are always going to get along best with those who are teachable. So as long as you go into your trip with that open mindset and you're ready to learn, you're ready to still have some fun and catch some fish, but you're ready to say, all right, whatever skill it is I picked out, whatever I'm trying to do, and we'll get to that in a minute, but whatever I'm trying to do with this trip, I'm going to learn as much as I can from this guide. You go into it with that attitude, you have nothing to be embarrassed about, even if your cast is needs some tightening up, pick whatever it is. It's not going to be a problem. So you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of most other clients if you go in with this right attitude. Don't worry about your skill level. Just go in ready to learn.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you're anything like me, you don't want to spend half your fishing day fiddling with knots and tangles or waste precious time switching from rig to rig. That's why we put together our Rigs and Knots Pocket Guide. It's a simple downloadable PDF that you can either memorize or take with you to the river. It shows you exactly how to set up proven rigs and what knots to use, so you can spend less time fumbling with your gear and more time fishing. Snag a free copy by scanning the QR code on the screen or hit the link in the show notes. All right, back to Untangled.
Tip number 2, you got to set your expectations before you book the trip. Now, what I mean by that is you've got to be very clear with yourself about what you want out of this guided trip. Are you booking because you want to go catch a trophy trout? You're fine with only catching maybe one fish all day, but it's going to be that one that's over 20 inches or 24 inches, whatever your personal benchmark is for a trophy. Hey, if that's what you want to do, just set that expectation. Do you want to go catch a whole bunch of fish? You not really care about how big they are. You just want the rod bent all day and just want to get into a bunch, because those days are a lot of fun sometimes when you have them, even if they're all a little on the smaller side. It's just nice to have good, consistent action. Or are you booking this trip because you really do want to learn a new skill? And yes, you still want to catch fish using that new skill, but the focus of the day is, hey, I am going to leave this trip learning a whole ton more about nymphing or about dry flies or about streamers, whatever it is. Okay. Set that expectation before you book that trip, because you are going to get the most out of your day of guided fishing if you narrow down what you want out of the day. And when I ran my own outfitter, I would always ask people, what do you want to do on your day? What is your goal with your guided trip? And their responses would dictate where we'd go fishing, and I'd focus on that with them all day long. And that conversation usually went, I would say, hey, what do you want out of your trip? And they'd say, well, we're brand new. I'd say, okay, brand new. Have you ever done anything with fly fishing before? And they'd say, I really think dry fly fishing looks cool. I'd like to try that. Or maybe they wouldn't even have that vocabulary, and that's fine, but they'd say something like, I like to see the fish come up and eat off the top, or something like that makes me think, okay, dry fly fishing. So, all right, I think we can go to this little mountain creek where there's a lot of fish. Maybe they're all smaller brook trout or cutthroat or what have you. And we're going to practice our dry fly fishing for half the day, and then we'll have lunch. And if you guys want to go back to it, we'll do that. And if not, we can go look for some slightly bigger trout. But we'll start your journey with those fish, get you the foundational skills, and then move on from there. And I would try and cater the trip towards what they expected and what they wanted, and just have that conversation with them. So even if you don't know all the right phrases, you don't know, maybe you say nymphing when you meant streamer fishing. Don't worry about stuff like that either. Again, you're here, you want to learn, you're eager. That's a guide's favorite client. Okay. The best guides, in my opinion, that's their favorite client. So just be clear with yourself, set your expectations before you book, and make sure you're ready to articulate those when you go to book that trip. And that is that segues us right into tip number 3. So once you've done that, once you've figured out, okay, this is what I want out of this trip, you need to find the right outfitter to book with. Some outfits, they're just not the best for people who are brand new to the sport. They might cater towards a long-term returning client list where almost everybody who books with them has been fishing for a long time. They've been fishing with the same guide on the same week for 20 years, and that's just their clientele, and that's the kind of operation they run. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, especially if they've been in business for a while, that's sometimes how these operations end up. Others might really put that focus on the beginner crowd. They might advertise a gear rental program. They might have something else that fits your needs. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to read reviews of the outfitters online, go to their websites, look and see, do they mention teaching beginners? Do they not mention it? Do they have, if you need some gear rented, if you don't have waders, for example, do they have a wader rental program? Really do your research, do your homework on the outfitter. Another great resource that I've used a lot personally is going and asking in local fly fishing groups, saying, hey, I'm from such and such place. I'm coming to fish this river. I would like recommendations on what guide to book with if I want to catch fish on dry flies all day, or if I want to learn, if I'm brand new and I want to try fly fishing, recommendations on who I should book with. And a lot of those local groups are pretty good, and they'll have good recommendations for who you should book with. So once you figure that out, you got to do a little bit of research. This is the most labor-intensive part of the whole process, is researching the outfitters. And a lot of their websites aren't super great because a lot of them were designed in the early 2000s, and it's 2025 now. So if that's the case, you might have to call them, talk to them a little bit, but again, don't worry, just have that phone call, whatnot. And that actually segues right into tip number 4. 2, 3, and 4 really just build off of each other. I know that this is a lost art in today's world, trust me, but call the outfitter. Have a conversation with them on the phone. Let them know exactly what kind of trip you're looking for. Don't just book it online. Call them and have a conversation with somebody, because that way there is no ambiguity. You're able to be crystal clear about what you want. You're able to say, hey, I'm brand new, or hey, I want to hunt trophies all day long. That's what I want to do. The nice part about this too is if you just book online, they'll usually just slot you in with the next available guide. If you call them and say, hey, this is what I'm looking to do, the best outfitters are going to match you with their guide who's really good at that particular thing. Okay. If you're brand new, you call in and say, hey, I'm brand new. I want to learn. They'll book you with their guides who are going to take care of you and are the best teachers. Okay. The best outfitters might even say, you might call someone to book, and they might even say, we cater mostly to experienced anglers, but I can recommend another outfitter who's great for beginners. And they might even send you somewhere else because they're not the right fit for what you're looking to do. I've had that happen before as well. It's very refreshing when people are that honest and that upfront with you about things. But by and large, you should be able to trust that conversation you're having with the outfitter. There's always going to be bad apples in the bunch. Unfortunately, that just happens in any industry that you're in. But guiding fly fishing is such a reputation business that if there is an outfitter out there who's always overpromising and under-delivering, they're going to be out of business pretty quick. Word's going to spread pretty quick that they're not who you want to go spend your hard-earned cash with. So having this chat before you book and you're able to talk to them, it's really going to make sure that your expectations are super clear and that you're going to have the best opportunity possible to get the most out of your day and out of your money and out of your time. So have that conversation, do your homework. Again, tips 2, 3, and 4 all really build off each other. Make the phone call. Don't just book online. Actually pick the phone up and call somebody. And then tip number 5, finally, is all about tips. Now, I know tipping can cause some extreme anxiety. And let's talk about this for a sec. Tipping is out of control. Are we really at the point in society where we're tipping on everything? I mean, you go to pick up, you place a to-go order online. You don't even talk to somebody. You go to the restaurant to pick it up, and most of the time they don't even bring it out to you. You go in and get it, and they turn the screen to you to pay, and they say, "Oh, do you want a tip?" Or they'll even ask for the tip in the app. It said, "I picked out everything I wanted. You didn't bring my food to the table. You didn't fill my water up. Nothing. No, it's gotten out of control. Tipping is just it is driving me nuts. Tipping is, and I 1000% tip when my wife and I go out to sit down dinners. Anything like that. If I sit down in an establishment to eat and someone's coming to take my order, 1000% tip. I also tip the people who cut my hair, because for a long time, and this is embarrassing to admit, I didn't know that tipping when you get your hair cut is like a thing. I had no clue about that, and so I never tipped for years. And then someone pointed out to me, "Oh, you really should tip when you get your hair cut." And, oh, okay, so yeah, I do that now. So I feel bad for all the years that I didn't do it. But anyways, this is not, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute. For guided fly fishing, tips are generally viewed like this. It's pretty customary. A lot of guides are going to expect tips, quote unquote, but not in that entitled way. It's a lot like any other service where someone they've got a basic service to perform, and then they're going to go above and beyond to earn that tip. And I view it the same way as like getting your hair cut, having something delivered to your house, dog grooming even, where they're doing the service and then you tip them because you're really happy with how it turned out, or just to show your appreciation. Say, hey, this was really great. This is a really great time. So tipping is generally done in fly fishing, and that's why I say that it can be quote unquote expected, because It happens a lot. It's just generally understood to be part of a guided trip. But the best guides, they're not planning on the tip. If that makes any sense at all, I hope I'm communicating that. They go into it knowing, yeah, there's a very high likelihood I'm going to get a tip today because that's just how the industry is. Tips are recommended for the guides, but they still need to earn it. So if your guide is acting just like a complete buffoon, if they show up late, which I've had a guide do before, and just no excuse, like, oh, I got a flat tire on the way, I'm so sorry. Something legitimate, right? That happens, that hangs them up. That happens. You don't hold that against somebody. But I had a guide show up like 45 minutes late one day, and he was hungover, and he was high at the same time. Not sure how he pulled all that off before 9:45 in the morning. It was almost a little impressive. But if they're not a complete buffoon, and if they're really putting in the effort to make sure they're delivering on the day, then a tip is pretty customary. And everywhere that I've fished, it's about $50 to $100 per angler. 100 would be pretty stinking high in a lot of the places I fish. I haven't been to a lot of the fancier lodges, like your fly out lodges in Alaska, for example. And tips can be a little bit more there sometimes, just depending on the clientele. It really does depend on where you're going. And don't be afraid to ask the outfitter, like what's an average tip for the area. And they might even have that on the website too when you're looking at their booking information. A lot of them will say, we suggest a gratuity of whatever, and they'll go in there. We actually just booked a trip for next year up in Canada. We're going to go fishing up there, and I've never been to that part of Canada before. We are staying at a lodge, but I wouldn't call it like fancy or anything like that. But I have no idea what to tip a guide in that situation. And I asked the outfitter, and they said, "Oh, it's this. It's usually between this dollar amount per angler per day." I said, "Great, that's awesome information to know and to have." And just to expound on that a little bit too. The guides, unless you're booking with an independent guide who does all their own stuff, and even then there's going to be overhead, but usually what happens is you've got the outfitter, and the outfitter pays for all the permits. They'll usually pay for some insurance, maybe not all of it. A lot of outfitters will also arrange the shuttles for the trucks and the drift boat at the end of the day. A lot of outfitters will pay for lunch. Some outfitters even supply all the rods, reels, flies, all that tackle and stuff. So the outfitters are going to lay out all of that for each guide. So the cost, that $600-700 that you pay for your guided trip, the guide doesn't see all of that. The guide, depending on how long they've been guiding, how good of a guide they are, and the outfitter's cut, the guide might walk home with 50% of that, plus whatever you tip them at the end of the day. So the guide's not getting that entire amount. And it really just depends, again, on the outfitter. So I'm not going to try and speak for everybody and say, oh, yeah, it's always a 50-50 split. Usually it's a little bit less than that sometimes. But the guide is not walking away with that entire chunk of change you paid. The outfitter's taking a significant amount of it as well in most cases. So that's just another little bit of insight into how the financial side of it all works. And then that's probably a little bit of why tips are expected, because we know that the guide's not getting all of it. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully my rambling about tips made some sense there. Bottom line, if your guide does a great job and you feel like you had a great day, give them a tip. And even if you can't afford, like, let's say they give a $100 level, but it's just not in your budget and the most you can afford is $50. Don't worry about that. Don't feel bad about that. I've talked to some guide friends of mine who they took a dad and a son out fishing, and I can't remember where they were. They were saltwater fly fishing somewhere, and it was a long day. The guide gave them a little bit of extra time because the fishing was so good. And they get back and they're settling up at the shop, paying the guide bill. And the cashier asks, hey, what do you want to tip the guide? And the guide, he was back behind the counter putting some stuff away. And he heard that and he looked, and the dad and the son had no clue the tipping was even customary. And they didn't have any extra cash, didn't have anything in their budget. And so they just pulled out the spare change, honestly, that they had in their pockets and handed it to this guide. And he was so touched by that they still tried to tip, even though they clearly didn't know it was a thing. And they still felt so good about it. They wanted to tip, and they gave literally what they had. They didn't have any more to give. He was really touched by that. And he tried to give it back to them. Like, no, guys, it's fine. And they said, no, take it. It was great. We didn't know tipping was a thing. We're so sorry. So a lot of those guides are going to be that way. It's not necessarily the dollar amount that matters. Tip as much as you can afford is usually my suggestion, especially if the guide really delivers on the day. Show them that, hey, I appreciate it. You took me out in your boat all day. You put up with my dad jokes or my incessant talk about wings or all these things I can point to that maybe make it a little unpleasant to guide me all day long. Say, I appreciate it. I had a great time. So again, hopefully this is helpful. If you got any other tips for guided trips, how to get the most out of guided trips, or any other questions about guided fly fishing trips, please don't be afraid to drop those down in the comments. I'd love to answer them. And speaking of answering things, we're going to wrap up the open of the show this week and dive right into the Q&A section. Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, there's a link to send those questions in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Anderson from Colorado has got our first question, writes in and says, 2 questions. 1, when fishing small dry flies, how do you see it? I noticed here on the front range when casting into pretty clear water, I have trouble seeing small flies such as size 20 Griffiths gnats, especially when there is some movement to the water, creating foam or maybe there are shadows across the water. I've tried doing a 2 dry fly rig, but the larger, more visible flies either spook the fish or mess up my drift. Secondly, and in a similar vein, when fishing small clear creeks with lots of pocket water, using an indicator or large dries spook fish, but when I use a smaller dry dropper rig, the dry fly can't stand up to currents and is easily pushed underwater, so I'm fishing the nymphs blind. What would be your solution to these issues? Anderson, good set of questions. Thank you so much for sending those in. Your first question. Learning to see small dry flies on the water is a skill just as much as casting or fly selection or mending or anything else in fly fishing. It is something that you have to practice, and the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, provided your eyes are still good. I know my fishing buddies who are older than me still have that issue of trying to find the flies sometimes, but they've also been doing it long enough that even with their eyesight that's not as good as it was 20 years ago, they're still able to spot those flies. So it is a skill. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So my number 1 piece of advice is just do it more. Practice, just compound that as much as you can. You're going to get better at it the more you do it. But specifically when you're out there, a couple of things are going to be able to help you spot that and help you speed up that learning curve. First thing is look where you expect that fly to land. So wherever you're trying to cast it, look where you expect it to land, because usually it's going to land pretty close to there as long as your casting is solid. And that, when I say as long as your casting is solid, I do not mean that you are a championship caster or that you could go teach people how to cast. I mean that when you make a fly cast, the majority of the time it gets to where you want it to go. And it does so in a way that looks natural. If you can do that, and if your casting's solid enough to pull that off, then your fly's going to land close enough to where it should, that if you look to where you expect that fly to land, sometimes you can just pick that out on the water. Stare at that spot, look where you want it to land, and usually you'll see where the fly ends up landing on the water. So that's one way that you can speed this learning curve up. Another way is once your fly line has landed on the water, if you cannot see that fly at all, look for the end of your fly line where it joins to your leader. Once you found that, follow your leader up. Just look upstream. Watch as the leader, maybe it kind of S-curves on the water, maybe it's straight, but follow it all the way up. And as you move your eyes up, that leader, you'll usually be able to pick out where your fly is at that point. I still do that sometimes when I'm throwing really small dry flies on long leaders. Sometimes I have to follow the leader all the way up to where the fly is. Another little trick that I've done before that's helpful is if I am tossing my fly out there and I just cannot see it for the life of me, I'll make a really short cast like 10 feet in front of me so that I can see exactly where that fly is. And once I can identify, all right, I'm looking for this exact brownish, whitish smudge on the water. Once I know what it looks like, it's almost like pattern recognition at that point. Once I've seen it up close, then I have a lot easier time picking that fly out at further distances. So that can be really, really helpful for me sometimes. Now, as to your double dry fly rig, the larger fly shouldn't be spooking those fish, even those finicky Colorado trout. So if you've got a size 20 Griffiths net on, you mentioned a real small one of those. Let's say you put a size 16 Adams on in front of it to help you see that tiny Griffiths net. Most of the time, that Adams shouldn't spook the fish. It might if they are really particular that day or the water's really low and clear, but the majority of the time, that bigger fly shouldn't spook those fish. If it does, it's usually because of a presentation issue. Your leader's a little bit too thick. Maybe you need to size it down. You're landing the fly too hard on the water and that bigger fly is scaring the fish. That's usually why it would spook the fish. It doesn't have to necessarily do with the size itself. Sometimes it can just be too big and the fish will scamper, but most of the time it's a presentation problem, okay? But if you can set this double dry fly rig up, again, you're going to use that 16 Adams. It's going to be almost that indicator. If you see it move, you'll set the hook. But you can also use it to, okay, there's my Adams. Then you follow that. Oh, look, right behind it, there's my Griffiths net. I see it now. And then you can track the flies that way. It's a really, really solid way to keep track of those small dry flies. And the double dry rig, I use that all the time, especially during mayfly hatches. I'll have a really small emerger or a cripple behind the usually about a 16-ish done of the mayflies that are out there. It really works wonders for me. The key, though, with the double dry fly rig is the setup and then where you put it on the water. So when you're setting up the double dry fly rig, you want to make sure that you match your tippet and leader to the size of flies that you're using and then how clear the water is. So if you've got a size 20 Griffiths net on, usually you'll probably want to bump down to about 6X for that. The rule of thumb is to take the size of the fly, divide that by 3, and then round to the nearest number, and that usually will give you the size of tippet that you need, okay? For example, a size 14. Sorry, my brain stopped for a sec. A size 14 dry fly, divide that by 3, you get about 4-ish. So you want 4X tippet. You move to 16, about 5X tippet. 18, still about 5. You could go to 6. Get 20, yeah, you're going to want to go to about 6X tippet at that point. Make sure that you match the size of your leader and tippet to the flies that you're using. And then if the water is super low and clear, maybe even consider going down another size. I will bump down to 6X if it's really low, really clear, and the fish are being very picky. Most of the time, I just go with 5. I like a little bit stronger line, and I used to regularly fish size 28 dry flies at 9X tippet. That's just overkill anymore. I don't enjoy doing that as much as I used to. I still like fishing the tiny dry flies, but that light tippet snaps so easy. And then if it doesn't snap, you're playing the fish forever to get them in. I like to go to the biggest tippet I possibly can, so I get the fish in quickly so that there's less stress on them once I've caught them. So that's why I always err on the side of going a little bit bigger. But once I've picked my tippet sizes, the other key is you want to make sure that you're tying about 18 inches of tippet between your first dry fly and your second dry fly. If you go any shorter than that, they're not going to have enough space between the two of them that they can drift independently. If one gets sucked into a little bit of a current and the other one's not, they'll start to drag or pull on each other. They'll bunch up and land too close to each other on the water. They won't look super natural. That 18-inch mark of tippet between the two flies has been really good for me over the years, and just making sure that I'm consistently getting those flies to drift independently of each other. And then the other thing as well is that 18 inches, it's not too long that the flies get tangled up with themselves, especially when you've got to throw longer casts. So that's why I go with that 18-inch mark. And then lastly, make sure that you're landing those flies in the same currents so that they're not dragging on each other. Like I just mentioned, make sure that you're landing them in the same line so that you don't have one causing drag on the other. It's a dead giveaway that the flies aren't real. Now, as to your second question about pocket water and indicators and double dry or big dry flies in pocket water, I fish pocket water all the time. Love fishing the small stream stuff. That's a lot of the fishing that I have closest to me right now, so that's what I'm on all the time. And in pocket water, I have found it very, very rare that a dry fly landing on the water is going to scare the fish. So likely what is happening is there's a little bit of technique with your cast that needs some refining to make sure that that's not happening. When you're tossing that dry dropper rig, you want to stop that rod tip at about 45 degrees in front of you on your final forward cast, and that's going to help those flies land just a little bit softer on the water. But if you're fishing pocket water, you're probably not casting too far anyways. So what you can do in that case is you can go ahead and use a technique we call high sticking. And what that means is you're going to make the cast and then lift. As soon as the line hits the water, you're going to lift all the line and as much leader off the water as possible. Hold your rod as high in the air as you can and let those flies just be the only thing that's drifting on the water. And if you can do that, you'll end up casting maybe 10-ish feet, maybe 15, depending on the pocket water you're fishing. You're not going to have very much fly line out of the tip of your rod if you do that. And that's going to help keep your flies landing nice and softly on the water surface. So that's another technique you can use. Just make sure that you're high sticking and then lifting as much line off the water as possible. That'll help those flies land a bit more softly. I really don't like to use indicators, strike indicators in pocket water at all. I honestly don't remember the last time I did that. Dry dropper rigs are just, it's hard to beat how effective they are in pocket water. It's a very sensitive rig, so you can see when they eat the nymph. It's delicate enough. It gives the fish two different options of flies to eat. It's a great way to fish pocket water. But if you do feel like you've got to size down on your dry fly just because it is too big and it is scaring the fish, which I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It's just rare. It's usually a technique issue and not a fly size problem. If that is happening, you do need to size down. Just make sure that you're matching your dropper size to the size of the dry fly that you picked. So the rule of thumb there is you want your dropper to be either the same size or ideally a size smaller than your dry fly. So if you got a size 16 Adams on, I'll go down to an 18. Is where I'll start for my dropper nymph. So I'll have like an 18 zebra midge on because that 16 Adams will hold up that 18 zebra midge just fine. One thing to bear in mind though is parachute flies generally aren't the best in pocket water because they don't float very high. So your standard Adams or your elk hair caddis, they're going to be a much better option because they're going to float higher in that rougher water. And then as far as floating goes, with floatant, I just make sure that I put the dry or the liquid floatant on first. And then once my fly starts to sink, I'll use the dry shake. The loon top ride is what I like. And I'll use that to dry the fly off the rest of the day as I continue my fishing. So hopefully, I know that was a lot of information, but you asked two really good questions. And I wanted to make sure that I tackled them. So if you've got any follow-ups or if anybody else does, please let me know, but hopefully that helps. Ryan from Tennessee has our next question, writes in and says, Do I need wading boots? If I do, then what are the things I'm looking for when purchasing my first pair? What do you guys like? Ryan, short answer is absolutely yes, you need wading boots. They're just incredible. They're a very integral piece of gear. And I'll give you a little story here. When I first got big into fly fishing, I had exactly $0. I had a pair of waders, but I didn't have money for wading boots. I didn't have wading boots at all. So I just grabbed an old pair of hiking boots and used those and thought, oh, this will be fine. And they lasted a surprisingly long time, but I was on a fishing trip and I laced them up. I walked into the river and I'd made maybe 2 or 3 casts. I went to move just to step a little bit closer, get a better angle. And my foot felt weird. I was like, what the heck? So I looked down and the boot had just come apart. It just disintegrated almost around my left foot. It was gone. It was done. It gave up the ghost. The hiking boot said, I wasn't made for this. So I left the river. I went to Sportsman's Warehouse, bought a pair of wading boots, bought a set of corkers. Those were my first boot. Went back to the river, and oh my goodness, I couldn't believe what I'd been missing out on, because wading boots are designed for wading. So they're actually built to help you walk smoothly in the river. They've got a wide, flat sole that's got a lot of traction on it. So you're going to instantly feel way more stable in the water than you will if you're just wearing hiking boots like I was, or just tennis shoes. You've got so much more stability in the water with a good pair of wading boots. And then again, they're designed to be used in the water. They're designed to be wet the entire time. So they're going to last. They're going to last much longer than if you just use the tennis shoes or the hiking boots. They weren't designed to be wet the entire time that you're out there. The wading boots they're also built to be able to hike around a little bit in them as you're walking from spot to spot on the river. They're just, again, they're purpose built for what they're supposed to do. And when you buy things that are purpose built for that, it's usually a much more pleasant experience than if you just try to make something else work. Now, we run Squala boots here at VFC. That's what we like. I'm running their RS boots, and Alex has their carbons. But what you really want to look for is a boot that provides you good ankle support, especially if you're like me. I can turn an ankle walking down the driveway. It's just, I got dainty glass ankles for whatever reason. They will shatter if you look at them too hard. Just made out of glass, man. So I always go for good ankle support, but even if your ankles are good, it's nice to have when you're walking in the river. It just gives you some reinforcement there. You want a boot that feels comfortable. I definitely recommend trying them on if you can before you buy them. Fly shops will let you try them on. It's a great way to make sure the boot fits on your foot correctly. And then I do prefer real laces over the BOA laces. That's the system with the cable where you twist the knob and it tightens it for you. Super convenient in the winter when it's freezing outside. Nobody wants to do laces up with cold fingers. But the BOA system just doesn't give me as consistent of a fit, especially if I'm hiking a really long distance all day. I'd rather have the laces instead. It just gives me a better, more secure fit than the BOA system does. That's just my personal preference. Laces are also a lot easier to fix if they go out on you in the middle of a fishing trip. If your BOA laces break in the middle of the day, your boot's toast until you can get new laces, and they're not the funnest thing to replace. I just did that on a couple of pairs of boots. So that's my 2 cents there. And then finally, you want to make sure that whatever boots you buy do come with a warranty on the workmanship. I have had some new boots blow up on me pretty quick, and I've always been able to get them replaced. Manufacturing just isn't what it used to be, unfortunately. We know that. So you'll blow through things sometimes, unfortunately. So you want a good warranty so that if that does happen to you, it's covered and you're not having to buy a whole brand new pair of boots all over again. So that's my 2 cents on wading boots. Definitely get them. Definitely spend the money. They are worth it. Even if you got a cut out date night, spend the money on them. I appreciate the question. Thanks. Sawyer from Pennsylvania has got our next question, writes in and says, whenever I go fishing, I almost never catch trout. There's no way to keep any fly line off the water at many of the distances I cast, and I don't use indicators to see my drift. I use patterns that are famous for being good producers, and I don't know what to do. What tips do you have for me? I love the show and I watch it when tying. Thank you. Sawyer, this is a good question. I didn't get quite enough context, so I'm going to have to make some assumptions. But it sounds like you're saying that you're headed out to catch trout, and you've got this idea in your head that when you're trout fishing, that you need to keep all of your fly line off the water the entire time. It also sounds like you might be under the impression that you need to use an indicator for any fly and not just with your nymphs, which are flies that are designed to be fished under the water like lures or bait in conventional fishing. If those are the assumptions that are getting made, then let's go through and clear those things up. Fly line is designed to float on top of the water. So unless you're high sticking, like I explained earlier, there is no need to keep your fly line off the water. It is designed to float, and even if you're fishing flies that sink below the surface, you want that fly line floating on top of the water. The only time you should be worried about fly line on the water surface is if you are casting to fish that are rising to eat dry flies off the top of the water. So if you see the fish coming up and they're eating off the top, you want to be careful about where your fly line lands, because if you make a cast and you land your fly line or even your leader at that point, you land that right on top of a fish that's actively eating off of the surface, that can spook the fish and it can make them stop rising, and then you don't really have a chance to catch them at that point because it's spooked them and that they're onto you. They know that you're there to mess with you a little bit. So that's honestly the only time you got to worry about your fly line being on the water is not landing on a fish like that. We call it lining the fish or lining the trout. That's really the only time you've got to have a major concern about your fly line landing on the water. Now, you can change where your fly line lands just by changing the angle that you're casting at the fish from. If they're rising directly upstream of you and you can't get the fly there without, maybe you overshoot the cast or you're just having a hard time, move to the left or the right, get an angle and make the cast so that your fly line lands to the left or to the right of the fish, but your leader and your fly land above it and then drift down into the fish, okay? Just changing where you stand, changing the angle of your cast, even lengthening your leader, adding a little bit more length to the leader so that it's landing instead of your fly line, that can help as well. So there's a few different things you can do there to make sure you're not spooking rising fish, but your fly line is designed to float on top of the water, and just make sure you're not landing it on top of rising fish. You should be okay. Now, the second part here, the second assumption we made, we only use our strike indicators or bobbers that they bob in the water. I'm going to call them a bobber. You only use those when we're fishing with nymphs and then sometimes when we're fishing with streamers. So flies that are designed to be below the river's surface. We've got to use some strike indicator at that point to tell us when the fish have eaten our flies or if they've got hung up on the bottom. Even when you're tightline nymphing, which is a style of fly fishing that doesn't use an indicator, but it still uses a brightly colored piece of line called a sighter so that you can see a visual representation of when the fish eat. You'll feel a lot of it too with that tightline system, but you still want the visual cue on top of that. There's always going to be some sort of visual component built into fishing flies underwater, unless it's streamer fishing, or there's a few exceptions to that, so I shouldn't say always. There's often going to be a visual component to fishing your flies under the water, and it's very helpful when you're starting out. So that's when strike indicators are used. Now, without more context or fishing with you, it's hard to nail down what exactly the problems are, but it really sounds like we could boil all this down to one of the things I try and just hammer as much as possible here on the show, and that is that you've got to put your flies in front of fish. You got to make them look real. That's your job as a fly angler, and it's much less about the pattern that you use. You mentioned, famous flies that produce a lot of fish. it's a lot less about what fly you're using and a lot more about how you fish it. Okay. So if I were you, I would go to the river and I would spend some time watching the real bugs drifting on the river surface. I would even, watch, throw some stuff in the water, watch as it sinks, watch as it drifts through the water, get a feel for what those drifts look like, get a feel for what that natural food source that you're trying to imitate looks like. And then I'd set up a nymph rig, an indicator with 2 nymphs underneath it. I'd find a run with maybe some walking speed water, and I would consistently work through that, get a good drift, get a good drag-free drift, and really build on that until you start catching some fish and start to build those habits and really drive home what kind of presentation you're looking for. Because again, it sounds like the problem is less about your fly selection, more about how you're fishing those flies. You can also go check out our How We Fish videos. We've got a ton of those and a bunch more coming as well, where we go into exactly how to fish nymph rig or how to fish dry flies in a bunch of different scenarios. So I would look at that as well. But hopefully that's helpful. Thanks for sending that question in. And that is going to do it for the Q&A section of the show this week. But don't go anywhere because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and picture from someone out in the audience who is living real life, who's having a great time, just living and breathing the fly fishing adventures that we've got going on. So if you've got a live real life moment that you would like to share, you can go ahead and send those in. There is a link to do that down in these show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's live real life moment is from Kyle, who writes in and says, "Hey, thanks for the great podcast and YouTube videos. I just thought I would drop a proud moment in my fly fishing journey. I've been tying flies for a few years now and wanted to put my own mark on my flies. When I started, a guy once told me to tie flies as pretty as I can because the prouder I am of the fly, the better I will fish it. I think that day has truly come. I've been watching videos about Ganga streamers, poring over all the colors in my streamer box that I like, and drew out what I exactly wanted in a great sculpin pattern. After 2 practice flies, I finally came up with the above mini Ganga in sculpin colors. I've been looking forward to this day when I could throw out a fly that I am so proud of. I can't wait for my ultimate practical art to pull some trout and smallmouth here in the Ozarks. I finally have my fly that I am the proudest of. Happy fishing. Happy life." Kyle, that's awesome. The fly tying aspect of it, we don't highlight that as much on the show as we should. I really need to do more of that because there is something so incredibly satisfying about catching a fish on a fly that you've tied, and you're going to experience that if you haven't already with this beautiful looking mini Ganga that you put together. You are going to experience that. And it's just so much stinking fun. It is so cool to catch a fish on a fly that you made yourself. And I really like that about, tie the flies as pretty as you can because if you're proud of them, you'll fish them better. Never thought about it that way. But that's a really interesting take on tying flies. So I appreciate it a bunch. And with that, folks, we are going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you so much for being here with us every week. It means more to me than I can tell you. If you want to help out even more, make sure you tell everybody you know about Untangled. Share the show with them, share the YouTube channel with them, and make sure you rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it, because the more ratings and subscriptions we get means we can help even more people live real life, which is our whole goal here at VFC. And speaking of that, it's about time to turn a podcast off and go out and get some fishing done. So go enjoy yourselves, make the most of the good fall weather that we've got left. And until next week, everybody, live real life.